Hi, everyone. Okay. Chris Matson is a well-versed naturalist who has a broad understanding of native plants from the northern Great Plains and tallgrass biome of the upper Midwest and the eastern US from Maine to Florida. Before moving to Florida, he was a board member and chapter president of the Prairie Enthusiasts, a nonprofit organization dedicated to native grassland conservation. He volunteered at several nature conservancy preserves, 2 local nature centers, and effigy mounds national monument. He influenced prairie management from South Dakota to Indiana during various projects and worked professionally on conservation projects in every state in the upper Midwest. In Florida, Chris has worked for the Nature Conservancy, Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, and several consultants. He currently serves as the District 3 Fire Coordinator and a district biologist at the Florida Park Service. He is currently learning fungal ID and basic mycology in order to better understand relationships between ecological restoration and mycology. Okay. Sure. Thank you so much.
Well, good evening. Let's see, where to start? So I was very interested in the photographs that my father used to take of mushrooms. He didn't know anything about mushrooms, but he sure did know about cameras. And so he took lots and lots of pictures, and then he would frame them and put them on the walls. So I had an interest in it from a really early age when I just kind of looked at pictures on the walls and things. So I feel like a lot of us that are interested in nature had some sort of attachment that we got from our families. There we go. I gotta sit down too. Pardon me.
Oh, that is full screen. Okay.
Okay. We should be good. All right. So along the way, I've done all kinds of these things with plants and vegetation, and it came to my attention that almost nobody that manages land focuses on fungi whatsoever. And that can be kind of an interesting entire biome that's missing from natural areas inventories, and then also from our understanding point of view of what's happening underground as well as above the ground in the natural world. And as we go through this, we'll look at some interesting things about the natural world and fungi. So what got me interested was my father, and then of course morel mushrooms. I lived in the upper Midwest, and every spring the snow would thaw. We'd start seeing the little Erebus start poking up its little head on the prairies, and boom, about a couple weeks later, we'd see our little dark morels popping up. And so everything I do has something to do with food. So maybe that's a good way to start with this, but it might not be if you don't know what you're doing. Unfortunately, there aren't morels in Florida, and this species, pheasantbacks, is only found. I've never seen one down here in the peninsula. But this is a pretty cool cluster of these things called pheasantbacks. And so this is a poor mushroom that grows as a bracket off of a tree. Yep, I tend to talk in wandering thoughts, and it's a little bit more fun that way than all this structured stuff. So bear with me. This photo is of this little teeny tiny mushroom. It's got a little black foot on it, each one of them, that attaches it to the substrate, which is usually rotting wood. It's a pretty cool little one of the guild mushrooms. But when we think about it, we don't really even have a really firm grasp of what fungi really are at this point. So mushrooms, of course, are the part that we see above ground. And so what does that mean as far as the entire thing of fungi? So mushrooms are the reproductive bodies of fungi, and they're only the reproductive bodies of some types of fungi. So there's other types of fungi that are never above ground or almost never above ground. So the visible is not the whole thing. We've got the tip of the iceberg, even on an amanita such as this one here. The photo that you see on the left side of what you see when you're in the field is about 1.5 inches or 2 inches above ground. And then if you dig down, there's another 4 or 5 inches of just the actual mushroom underground. And then who knows how many feet of hyphae there are sticking through the soil and all that kind of stuff. So we'll talk a little bit about parts of mushrooms and fungi in just a second. So here we are. So we have a mycelium in the upper left corner, and that's on an ectomycorrhizal fungus. So these are fungi that will form a union with trees and shrubs and herbs and different plants, and then sometimes even other fungi, and they will trade nutrients back and forth. And in doing so, they benefit because they receive one nutrient and the tree or the plant receives other nutrients. And I believe one sends carbon and the other one sends nitrogen. So they're trading those things back and forth. If you look in the upper right, we have the fungal life cycle here. So you've got this fruiting body and all that. So then the spores fly through the air and they germinate somewhere on the right substrate. And after they do that, then they form a mycelium. And you can see there's two paths from mycelium that come back around back to the spores, et cetera. So we'll take the right-hand path for a second. So we end up in an asexual fruiting stage, and then that produces these conidia, and then they also germinate back and produce more mycelium. But that mycelium is more clonal, and it doesn't have as much genetic variation as the part that when you find a mushroom itself instead of just the fungus. Sorry. So then we go back to the right side or the left side, and we have the sexual union of the various mixed spore-produced myceliums, and then they get up in the air and they produce these wonderful mushrooms. Now we look down and we see the fungal hyphae. So if you were to take a spore and grow it on a medium in a petri dish, you would get this pattern like you would see in this area right in here. And that particular little pattern is just an outgrowth of a spore that becomes an individual fungus. This could be one or hundreds of fungi on this particular picture right here that are interlaced within each other. It's kind of similar when you think about like aspen trees up north or sumac down here. It could be one sumac as all of those stems sticking up in Jackie's patch at her restoration, or it could be several or dozens of sumac plants that are all individuals, but you would have to dig underground and take a look at how things are connected to really know that. Okay, now we've got the mushroom itself, and we'll look at a gilled mushroom. So of course, first we have these gills on the bottom side, and we have a cap, and we have the stem, and on this particular one, we have this ring called an annulus. And then at the very bottom, we have this vulva. And that vulva is a structure that was attached to the rim of the cap of the mushroom up here at one point. So it is also inherently that's called the universal veil, where that's attached from the very bottom of the mushroom to the cap of the mushroom. A partial veil would be from where this ring annulus attached to the cap of the mushroom. So those are the structures and stuff that you would be thinking about when trying to identify a cap mushroom that has gills on it. When we're not going to talk about the structure of every kind of mushroom out there, we'll just kind of look at some of these things as an enthusiast would look at it, because I am not an expert, I am an enthusiast. I am not mycologist by trade or anything else. I'm a jack of other trades. And this is what I do more for fun than I do for a living. So here we have a fungus that is interesting because it has pores on the underside. And then it also has this growth that attaches to wood. And that would make this one different than the false turkey tail. This is the turkey tail. And the false turkey tail is different in that it does not have pores on the underside. Whoops. So, but that still hasn't answered much of what really fungi are, and we'll take a look at that. So they're not animals, yet some of them live off of living or dead animals. Good examples are things like athlete's foot, and then these cordyceps mushrooms. They also live off of dead animals or living animals, and then they kill the animals. And we've seen toenail fungus in commercials. And then there's a fungus called the corpse finder, and that's a mushroom that thrives off of the rotting bodies of dead creatures. That's very interesting. Okay, so some of the roles that they play, we're still kind of talking around what a fungus really is, but they have mutualistic relationships with woody plants. They have saprophytic actions. They break down plant material and make it simpler so that it can be incorporated into soil and then reused. So they can have a direct attack on the plants, and that would be such things as parasites and parasitoids, which is like the cordyceps. It's a parasitoid because it always ends up in the death of the creature that it that it attacks. Then we have direct attacks on animals, direct attacks on fungi. Some fungi work together, but it's strange that fungi can attack fungi. There's a whole entire group of fungi called hypomyces that grow on other fungi and help and digest them. And there's a mushroom called the lobster mushroom that is actually not really very edible until it's attacked by a hypomyces and becomes the lobster mushroom. It's kind of crazy. I can't imagine trying that. Whoa, look at that. That looks really yummy. There are fungi that live underwater, and there's also fungi that live underground their entire time too. So the truffles and other things that are like truffles live underground. And the idea that a fungus can live underwater and produce spores and they can go all over kind of tells you how versatile they are. I kind of have to ferret out the rest of the information as we go along. So natural phenomena that are not fungi include things like clouds and knotty wood burls and Indian pipes, which are, of course, parasitic plants. And then, of course, nuclear explosions are not. And seals do kind of look like mushrooms on a stump, but they're not really mushrooms on a stump. So. And of course, pancakes could be mistaken. I read in the Peterson's Guide many, many years ago that someone found a burnt pancake at a campsite, and they thought it was a fungus. So they turned it into an herbarium, and they were stumped for a while, and finally they figured out that it was not a fungus. Of course, there's other things going on here, but we've got a lichen going on. And a lichen is part fungus and part alga or part cyanobacteria or part other fungus, all kinds of different things going on. But the world around the fungi is adapting to fungi. And so we have this cryptic insect right here that's decided that it wants to mimic being a fungus. Little difference on forms of fungi right here. So we have our normal cap and gill fungus right here. But if you look at some of these fungi, they have pretty interesting structures. Like if you look at the reticulation on the stem of this mushroom right here, that's really neat. And then if you look at this one grew right through the pine needles that were sticking up next to it. and just surrounded it and engulfed it. And who knows what's going to happen after that. Then there's this fungus. Back when I made this presentation about 3 years ago, did not have the proper scientific name, and it just got named and got reclassified. This is a Florida, at this point, we think a Florida endemic mushroom, and that's pretty cool too. And that's found actually at Lake Louisa State Park. That was one of the first find sites for it, and that's pretty neat. Then we've got this cool thing, these G-asters, these earth stars as they're called. And so they're similar to a puffball that unravels and then pushes itself up in the air. So it'll look kind of like a puffball like this. And then as that develops, it will open up like the star, and then it'll then push itself up in the air right about the time that the spores are forming, so that it can get those spores as high in the air as it can for the creature that it is. That's pretty neat. Well, a lot of people think that fungi are like plants and that they have roots and stuff, but they really don't have roots. These mycelium networks and hyphae are things that on the macro level look kind of like roots to us, but it's kind of like a wad of fishing line. It's not really roots either, but it kind of looks like roots. And it serves a different function than roots in some ways. And then down here we have the false turkey tail, and the false turkey tail doesn't have any pores in it. It's just smooth. So they call it a parchment fungus. And then there's these cool little yellow jelly fungi right here. They're pretty cool. Okay, we'll look a little bit at guild mushrooms. This is pretty standard looking guild mushroom. And if you look at this, this is a set of different types of guild mushrooms, different views of them, and some different species. This one up here that has the orangish cap or the reddish top with the orangish sides is called a waxy cap, and they're really common in hardwood areas in Florida. Then this right here is part of a group that's called web caps, and so they have an interesting feature where their veil is webby, and so they call it a cortina, and that cortina is used to identify it from other mushrooms. And down here, this is a tallow gill, so waxy cap, tallow gill. Now we're getting confused. And so these here's the cortina right down here on the cortina at the cortinarius. It's kind of blurry looking, but you can kind of see this kind of film that's covering between the cap and the stem on that. That's pretty neat. We've got some more textures here. So we're looking at a group called lentinus, and these are real common mushrooms that are found growing on dead wood in Florida. You can go to pretty much any state park or county park that has a naturalish area in it, and if there's wood falling on the ground, you can almost always find one of these lentinus fungi growing out there. Sorry, I don't know what's going on. Maybe batteries or something. It's okay. So then over here we have oyster mushrooms. Anybody here had oyster mushrooms from the store? Okay. Anybody here had oyster mushrooms from the woods? Okay, got a few of them. Excellent. All right. What are some notable differences between the store ones and the woods ones? Somebody who's had the woods ones. Smell different? Okay. 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 Okay, so the answer was that they need to harvest them quick and they can go bad fairly quickly. And that's definitely the truth. And the store ones, you don't have to pick the little black beetles out of them either. So, okay, and then we've got all kinds of things going on down here. We've got these chlorophyllums. These are the sickener mushroom is what they're called. They kind of have an unusual look to them with that smooth cap and that dimple in the middle, and called an umbo. And then we have lookalikes like right up here, which is a different species altogether than these down here. And then we have different ones here growing on wood. Yeah, this is an old slide, so they've renamed this thing. And I think it's Marasmius vagus now is what it's called, which is a pretty interesting species that grows in people's lawns. I think it's been spreading through Florida from other parts of the agriculture industry, from what I understand is how it got here. So milk caps are an interesting type of mushroom that you can find out in the woods, and most of them have depressed centers. So you can see they're kind of funnel shaped. This kind of funnel shape to them, and they don't look like that when they're young. You know, you can see that like this one right here and this one here are not as funnel shaped as this one down here, but when you look at them, you can also see that if you damage their gills or even the cap or even the stem, sometimes you get this substance coming out of them, and this milky stuff can be a variety of different colors, and that'll help you with identification if you so want to learn how to identify these things. And they have different textures to them. So, and there's a lot of really good eatable ones, and there's also a lot that aren't that good to eat too. So it's always fun to kind of go, what's this? And identify what you're looking at. But that milk stuff can be white, it can be green, it can be orange, it can be red, it can be pink, and it can be blue. And the blue ones are actually fairly common in Florida. They're usually a blue mushroom, and they have blue looking latex. On this particular one, we have some flavor profiles. That's another thing that's interesting about identifying mushrooms is as long as I'll say, not you, maybe I, chew and then spit out everything I chew, I can take a piece of mushroom and put it in my mouth and chew it and spit the whole entire thing out. And that flavor profile will help me identify it and eliminate certain species from others. And we're not looking for how pleasant it is so we can cook it, because there are many pleasant tasting mushrooms that can kill you. So it's not about that. It's about identifying. And there are many that are unpleasant when they're raw that can be pleasant later on. There's one that tastes and smells like an ashtray, and it's actually not a bad edible once it's cooked up. So that's kind of weird, but I don't tend to eat that one, but I do prescribe fire for a living, so I get enough ashtrays. So this one here happens to taste acrid pretty quickly too. You put a little tiny piece in your mouth, or you put your tongue on the latex, and the next thing you know, it feels like somebody stuck a bunch of needles in your tongue. Real pleasant. But it helps you identify what it is. There are some people that will pickle these and then eat them. And you can take a fish you didn't want to fry and you can pickle it and you can eat it and turn it into something good. And so you can do the same thing to some of these mushrooms. So here's a group called the crumble caps or the brittle gills, russulas. If you're on any of the Facebook websites with all the identification for fungi, you'll see lots and lots of, what's this? And it's a little red russula. And everybody looks at the red russula and goes, wow. And then they say, well, it's a red russula. You need molecular stuff in order to identify it. And then they go, okay, and they move on. Okay, so one of the groups that has some of the deadliest mushrooms in the United States and in the world is this Amanita group, the agarics, and they're known for having something at the base as well as something interesting about their cap. And so they have that vulva. Some of them have an annulus ring, and then sometimes the vulva can be a sac and sometimes it can be a bulb. And so when the taxonomists go out and try to identify them, they say, is it a bag or a bulb? And so we're looking for bags and we're looking for bulbs when we look for this kind of mushroom. And that helps us split the groups, and that gets us to where we're going. And you can kind of see in the middle picture, we've got a yellow piece of bulb going on at the base of the plant. And then you can see this one kind of looks like a turnip, and this one kind of looks like a turnip too, I guess. I don't know what happened here. This one was starting to disintegrate. So it gets to be challenging when you're out in the field if you want to get to know how to identify a mushroom. And here's a whole selection of pretty caps that I've seen from a whole bunch of different types of amanitas. And so we've got these yellow ones, and we've got this peach colored fly agaric right here, which is really common associate with loblolly pine in the state. And then over here we have one of the ones that's sometimes called the grisette, and that's sometimes some people can identify them well enough to eat them and things like that. But most of these are probably not something we want to try to identify to eat because of the fact that some of these mushrooms are some of the most deadly. But they're pretty. And here's some more, another selection, another views of different stuff going on here. So we looked at that peach colored fly agaric, and that's this mushroom here. It's also this one down here. You can see at different stages in its development on different individuals, there's variation in their color, in the development of their cap, and in their height, that kind of stuff. So they're more like people, because you can have a lot of people in a family and they can all be different heights, but yet at the same time their faces all look kind of the same. And some of them have different builds too. You have the skinny one, and you can have the more built one, and yet their faces still kind of look the same. So eventually with fungi, you get to know that kind of same kind of gestalt. And here's another group, all kinds of different amanitas, really diverse group. There's an entire Facebook group page called Amanitas of North America, and like they're numbering them because there's so many of them. They don't even know how to identify them all yet. There's just so many of them out there. Okay, so another popular thing in the fall is this thing. This is a ringless honey mushroom. This is an old slide set. They've changed the name a little bit, but it's close enough to work. It looks close to another group of mushrooms called entelomas, but the spore print on this one is white and that one's pink. So this one is considered edible, though some people like it more than others. I find that you have to cook it a long time. It takes a long time to cook these for me to eat them. They're tough and chewy. And then we get into glow in the dark versus edible. So on the left here, we have the southern jack-o'-lantern, and on the right down here is one of the chanterelles. This is an old name for it from back before I got good taxonomic information. But the common chanterelle of the area is a pretty cool thing. They don't have real gills. They have these funny folds in them that look like gills, but these gills are much more formal looking and definitely gills. Okay, so some more different cool mushrooms here. I'm gonna skip that page. Okay, so here we are, the chanterelles. So these are really popular mushrooms. The black trumpets are part of the group. These little red cinnabar chanterelles, scarlet chanterelles are part of the group. And then a lot of yellow, different types of yellow chanterelles are out there. And because there's so many different kinds of yellow chanterelles, you can start getting them as soon as it gets warm and wet, and until it gets too cold for them, they'll just keep coming and coming as long as it stays wet. Had a great time up in the Appalachians this summer, and I went into a friend's backyard and just took a little bucket with me and filled it. It was so heavy I could barely drag it in the house in about 15 minutes. And then so I cut them up and made dinner. And here's some other ones. You can see these are, they're kind of close to each other, but remember we got the, the different relatives. And so this one's got a little different color to it, and this one grows in groups. And so this one that grows in singles, that's taller and stuff, and a little bit more rich in color, is a different species than this one over here. So everything gets more difficult and more complex in nature the more you think you know. And then we're off and there's no more gills. What happened to the gills? Now we've got these mushrooms with a stalk, but they grow in the soil and they've got pores. These are called boletes. And boletes are one of my favorite kinds of mushrooms, because when I was young with my dad, he'd take pictures and he'd take pictures from the top, like, like me bending down like this, and you look and you see my hat, and then you go like this, and then you get to see the face after you look underneath a little bit. And for me, having that cool surprise of that's not a gill mushroom, that was pretty neat. And here's some that are not quite already opened all the way, growing under white pine in the mountains in North Georgia. And you can see that they have this veil growing across the cap and the stem. And here's a whole bunch of different types that you can look at. You've got these dark looking ones here, and they're actually considered really good edible mushrooms. Then this one called the chestnut bolete, which has got a new name to it because the chestnut bolete actually is a different species that isn't found down here in the South. Pretty cool. So I've got a lot of work to do to fix this slide. Just for kicks, we get to see this is the same species in a different stage in growth. So this is the earlier stage of the same mushroom here. And these are found down into North Florida. And they're not found quite down this far south as far as I can see. I haven't seen one. And I'm dreaming of it because I went out with some people that taught me about mushroom ID, and they served us a salad of these things with just like pickled, like they were just like marinated asparagus, and they were just delicious. They were amazing. And here's a frost bolete that's been chewed by some slugs. Usually it has this pretty cool stem, but this stem's been kind of beat up. But if you look at it, we've got this funny honeydew going on. And this is a feature of some of the boletes. It's not considered the same as the milk caps. This is actually being emanated from the pores, kind of like honeydew, and it's called guttation. Interesting feature. People like to, make real fancy names for stuff. I think it's cool. One of the ways we identify these is we cut them in half, and we look at the profile of what's going on. And while it's cut in half, we kind of time how long it takes to change and turn color. Some of them turn blue, some of them turn red, some of them just turn brown, and some of them don't do anything. And this stuff here is called reticulation on the stem. Netting is what that means. It's a technical term for netting. And this is the one that they renamed, and at the time it was this name, and now it's not this name anymore. Here's a good example of ones that turn blue. Now this one here turned blue instantly. Like we cut it and it just flushed blue. You would not believe how that got that blue. This one here, I bruised it and it turned blue real slow, and then it turned this rusty brown color right here, almost bloody looking. And this one here has this weird tide mark on it right here, and it has pink spores that rain down onto the stem and make the stem pink. So there's some different things going on for helping identify species, even though they kind of look the same. If you're just kind of casually looking, you go, oh, look at that. Those look kind of the same. But then you look at the details and then it's different. So lots of things to look at. You can say, wow, look at all these things that changed on these, and they're so different from each other. And then this one. Now I was at Lake Louisa State Park when I found this, and turns out that it's a hotspot for these in some of the pine areas. And it's really neat, but it's super bitter, and it's never going to be edible for people that can taste bitter. But it has this beautiful, beautiful looking alligator skin reticulation on it. And it just begs to be photographed in the morning. Now, here we go with, there's a rule breaker everywhere. And this is kind of the rebel of the boletes. You can see it has gill-like structures, and yet it's a bolete. So the spores and the microscopic characters of this put it in the group of boletes, but it has the macro features of a gilled mushroom. So that's kind of interesting. Now we're going to jump out of boletes, things that grow on wood. And these are all polypores of different kinds. And you can see some of them have different asymmetric formations to the way they grow. And so they don't grow like an umbrella, they grow like somebody holding a fan to the side of you, or a palm leaf. That's kind of neat. Some different ones. This one here gets this funny, like mirror images of itself sometimes. They all have pores on them, on those ones. And these are some of the ones that people find out in the wood in this genus Ganoderma. And it's real popular with herbalists for creating tinctures and having your daily little amount of the, what they call reishi or reishi. I don't know how to say it because I don't do it, but it's pretty cool. The one that's over in Asia is very popular among the local folks there as something that helps benefit them for health. And there are a lot of folks that are on the bandwagon of trying to find out whether or not this thing is still good for us over here too. And I hope they find out that it is. And I'm looking forward to the day that we have really solid evidence of that. All right, here we are, the parchment fungus. This is a false turkey tail. Here's a different form of it. This one is called Sterium complicatum. Someone named it right, because that is a pretty complex looking thing. And then this is a close-up of the teeth on a tooth fungus, which is actually from this photo down here with me holding my little knife for a scale. And so those teeth that are up here are these actual textures that are on this cap of this fungus, tooth fungi. And this one also has teeth on it, and yet from the top it has this, the elbow niger is the name of it because it's black with white all over it, and it's pretty cool. And here's one of a lot of the foodies' favorites, this lion's mane fungus. Some people call it shrimp of the woods or lobster of the woods or something else. I don't know. And I've had it a couple times, and I like it. It's good. I probably I'm not chef oriented to that one yet. Something that people probably will never eat. This is called bird's nest fungus, and you'll find it on rotting wood and hardwood areas. So these little things here, the rain will fall, and every once in a while a drop will hit the right mark and splash into here, and these little egg-looking structures have the spore surfaces on them. And so when that water drop hits it, it splashes the spores up in the air so that they can fly up in the air and make their way to where they're going. Bless you. Okay, so then we look at this selection of colors and this riot of textures. I think that it's great that somebody named a mushroom jelly babies. That is one of the most fascinating things. And if you've ever held one, they feel like these little weird gummy bears crossed with rubber, and they're just wonderful. And they're kind of translucent, and they just beg for people to like look at them. And I don't know if they're edible. I don't think so. Other little textures going on in the jelly world is this Dacropinax spathularia. Then we've got a coral fungus over here, Clavularia or Clavaria fragilis. So it's a fragile thing, and it's kind of brittle, and it sticks up in some cool hardwood areas. Then we've got some false morel looking things down here called saddleback mushrooms or elfin saddles, Helvella species. These all have surfaces on the external parts, not underneath, that have the ability to produce the spores and then reproduce that way. So kind of like if you were wearing a glove and the entire outside of the glove is able to do that, rather than wearing an umbrella and having all the stuff underneath the bottom of the umbrella. So it's kind of interesting. One day I was out in the woods with some friends of mine back in the north, and I looked and I turned my head around the side of a tree, and one of the guys that was a little bit more knowledgeable about this stuff than me said, "Oh my gosh, what happened?" And I looked, and there were these fingers sticking out of the tree, and they looked exactly like people's fingers. And these dead man's fingers can be pretty startling if you see them in the right place, the right time. Then we also have coral fungi, which are right down here. And different types of coral fungi can be found all over the world. And they can come in all varieties of colors, from purple, red, and white, and green, and all kinds of cool stuff. Now right here, I was thinking I was finding what I was looking at over here. And so what we have going on the right side are these cool parasitoid fungi. So this one here is parasitoiding on this pupa, this insect pupa right here. And so what it does is the spore gets released, it floats through the air, it lands on this pupa, and it starts growing inside of it. And then it takes over everything in it and digests it for its own betterment while not helping out the pupa whatsoever. Up here, we've got this thing that we dug out of the ground, and I don't know how my instructors helped find this thing. All I saw was dirt. And so this is a deer truffle right here, and this little deer truffle parasite right here was growing out of the soil in this area of woods that we were in, looking for these very same things. But you know how it is, when you've seen it, you know where to find it, and when you haven't seen it, you don't know where to find it. And that's one of the mysteries of being out there. So here I was thinking that this would be similar to one of these, and boy was I wrong. All this is if you've ever grown a potted plant and watered it an awful lot, you get these things. They come up, they're called Leucocaprinus burnbaumii, and they're just cool little yellow mushrooms that pop up in your potted plant, and they can make you just a happy person for a short time before they turn into mush. All right, so you thought you'd seen it all until you've come to the puffballs, and this one is a pig skin puffball, and these are two different species. So we got this one with kind of a rough skin, real deep pits and real high knobs on the skin, and this one that's not so high and deep. And they were growing in different places on different stuff. So that's pretty fun there. And then we have this this other group of puffballs, and the pig skin puffballs are not edible. So these ones here are not edible. And when they're young, they have a purple brown inside of them, and they smell wonderful. And they contain a type of toxin that makes you throw up and want to throw up for about 12 hours or so. And I know this from experience as a young man who was very foolish. One got mixed in with some of these one time. And so these are, if you find a puffball in the woods, you have to cut it in half and look at it to make sure that it's not an amanita egg, because they will grow in a shape that looks like a puffball at their beginning stages, and then they'll open up and become a mushroom. Well, if you cut that thing and it looks like a little mushroom inside, then you don't want it. But if it looks like just a globe and it's all round and stuff, then you're good, if it's white on the inside. Now, related to these are, of course, we already talked about the earth stars, which reach for the sky that way. Then there's also these things, which this is the wrong name, and they've rechanged that one too. So there's been a lot of work by a lot of people doing mushroom work in the past 5 years. So this thing is called an earth ball. Sometimes people call it the dog poop mushroom or something like that too, because they get these kind of, it decomposes and it's got this crumbly look that makes people think about that. So, and that was really weird to find. I found this under the office eaves of the boardwalk at my office at Wekiva Springs State Park. And it was pretty much bone dry when I found it. And I thought, well, how did this thing get here? So I looked up on the web, and the closest thing I found on the web were these things that grow in the desert out in Arizona. So I asked some people about them that I didn't know very well, but they were really smart, and they said, oh, that's one of these. So that's what I came up with, that was what that is. And so then I've seen them a few times since then, and you got to take a better look at them. A different look of earth stars. This is a different species than the last one that was on that page. And so it's got different structures on it. And then places you can look for mushrooms. This is a fun one. The state of Florida makes it a kind of a legal game to go look for mushrooms. Working for the state parks, I know for a fact that all biological and cultural items are protected within the state parks. And so that includes the harvesting and foraging for fungi and things like that. Now, of course, if you're out there and you eat a few blueberries or huckleberries and nobody sees you, probably nobody's going to get all that worked up about it. But unfortunately, there are a lot of people out there that are concerned about fungal harvest and things like that. And because these are biological laboratory areas, and we have a lot of research going on by invited researchers, we kind of keep them as kind of museum pieces for nature rather than our harvesting areas. So where to harvest or find fungi for your own personal enjoyment would be probably in residential areas, in vacant lots, in pastures and ag type areas, in lands that you can get permission to do collection in and identification and things like that. And then also in public, like city parks and things like that, from what I understand, are not too bad of good places to find fungi for that purpose. And, you know, this is something you can take way out of Florida. Here we are in Alaska, you know, enjoying both fungi and fruit. And then, you know, Yellowstone National Park and Olympic and Wisconsin and the Smoky Mountains and various other places in Yosemite. So, yep, we do not need this kind of dress to enjoy harvesting mushrooms or looking for mushrooms or just taking pictures of mushrooms. And it's always good to bring a friend. And sometimes the essential trail cat. So I talked about these things called spore prints. So what do if you want to identify a fungus? You take a piece of white paper, you take a fungus, you cut it so that the part that makes spores is face down on the paper. So it might be complex if you don't know which part. You might put various different directions down on the paper. Then you put a cover over top of it so that it doesn't blow it all away while it's waiting to be done. And in, you know, a couple hours, you can come back and check it and see if something has settled on the paper. If the spores are white, you can hold the paper at an angle and look at it like you're trying to kind of look down its horizon, you might say. And that way you can see whether there's texture on the paper. Once you have the spores, if you're a real nerd like me, you'll get a high-powered microscope and you'll stick them under there and you'll fix them in oil, and then you'll look at the spores under the microscope. And here's a picture of a whole bunch of different books. This is being recorded, I believe. Maybe not? No, it is. Okay. Okay, so people can come back to this and they can look at the titles of the books. This is a whole selection of different books that you can use for mushroom identification. Some of the ones that are more modern and have more up-to-date taxonomy are at the bottom of the page, whereas the ones at the top are just really good general references. So as far as having fun with them for cooking, these are chanterelles up here on the upper left, and here's some more chanterelles down here on the lower left. And then over here I have common milkweed pods with boletes up in Massachusetts. So just different things you can do. There were thousands of common milkweed plants where I got these, so don't worry, the monarchs will be okay. And of course, find a mellow place to have that snack. And then remember that mushrooms do more than just get eaten and get looked at. There's all kinds of things going on. People are in the technology world developing packaging made out of mushrooms, out of fungal hyphae and mycelium. And then these are all different yarns of different colors and different knittings that have happened by somebody who's a world expert on using dyes from mushrooms, mushroom-derived dyes, to put together yarn and fabric. And thank you very much.
Any questions? If anyone has any questions, and Lori, if anyone on Zoom has any questions, please raise your hand and we'll answer those too.
Okay.
No, we have time for questions.
I have two questions. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how mushrooms respond to fire, and then I also, when you were showing the blue leaf mushrooms and the blue bruising,
Oh yeah.
Made me think of. I was just wondering if there's any relationship.
Okay, I'll talk about both of those things separately. Okay, so the questions were, how do mushrooms relate to fire? And I'm thinking you're thinking about natural fire and landscape fire and fire ecology. Okay, so that's a very new field, and some mycologists have been tracking some of these things, and some nerdy not mycologists like me have been starting to track some of these things. And so every time there's a landscape fire, whether it be out west or here in the east or in the southeast or up north in the northeast or wherever, there's an entire cascade of things that are happening. There are plants that are encouraged by that. There are plants that are discouraged by the fire. And then that follows suit that the fungi are also in the same boat, where there are probably winners and losers depending on lots of different factors. Every fire is different. Some fires have very low impacts on soil, and some have very high impacts on soil. And because much of fungi are living in either decaying wood or in soil, fire can have a totally transformative effect on the fungal community from that point of view, of encouraging the breakdown of those organic materials. And so that breaking down of the organic stuff changes how that system works, because in the South, at least, pines and conifers do better on mineral soil. So pines and cypresses and the organic soils tend to be better for broadleaf plants like hardwoods and you know, those kinds of things. So those are two big deals. And so the associated fungi will be associated with those plants that are associated with the normal associations of those plants, will be encouraged or discouraged depending on their relationship to the particular plants that are affected by the fire. And who knows, it might even be that we damage the fungus and that shifts the plants too through that very same relationship. We don't know that. That's pure speculation there, but because we don't know which way, you know, the cart and the horse are on that, there's definitely something to be looked at. That's just one concept of how that works. We do know that out in the western United States, in the mountains, if a mountainside burns, people will go and look at that year after the mountain burns for morel mushrooms, and they will find tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of them. And some people will pick for 3 or 4 weeks out west, and they will make all the money they need to live the rest of the year off of morel mushrooms for their 4 weeks of work. So they'll make $40,000 or $50,000 a year on morel mushroom picking, which is kind of crazy to think that they're that abundant after the fire that they're just all over the place. And it's really interesting. You know, you think, wow, wouldn't everything eat those things? I've seen deer walk right by them. I've never seen a rabbit eat one, or a squirrel or anything like that. They must be detestable when they're raw. I hear they're not really palatable, and they might be toxic while they're raw too. So that's one thing about that. So that's just one example. But even the boletes, I noticed there's an awful lot of boletes that come up after a fire, and some that will not come up after a fire too. So the other side of the question was blue staining, and what is its relationship to psychedelic mushrooms? Well, I guess there are a couple of species of psychedelic, or groups of psychedelic mushrooms, that turn blue when they're bruised. But the bigger part of that is that blue bruising does not indicate any psychedelic thing. It's just more of an oxidation thing going on from the bruising effect. And so there's a lot of non-psychedelic mushrooms that are good to eat, that can, and some that are not good to eat, that bruise blue too. So
We were planting grasses up here in the Sandhill area last year, and an Italian guy was walking by. He was picking mushrooms, well, fungus from the roots of the pine trees. They said they were porcinis. He was eating them. Any idea if they were porcini mushrooms or?
Okay, so remember the group called the boletes there. There's an entire book this thick of boletes that can be found in Florida. And so when you narrow it down towards the porcini type, we don't have the specific one that's in Europe here, but we have ones that are in that same group of subgroup of the boletes. And so that one can be found in the southern United States, and it grows, sporadically here and there. And so you can find something in the group that some people call porcini, but it won't be specifically the one in Europe that they call porcini, but it's just as good. Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing is that it was just like a rediscovery by mycologists that were doing this molecular taxonomist work, that a lot of things that were named off of European and Asian species in the US were not the same thing, and species wise. So now it's just like an explosion of new literature and new findings are happening, and it's kind of fun looking at it from the outside instead of having to do all the hard work. But it's also kind of challenging to keep up with all the new naming. As you saw, there were 15 things in my slideshow that have changed names in 3 years. So, yes.
So I kind of want to go back to when you were talking about the morels with the after a fire, and I haven't seen this anywhere else. I watch a lot of YouTube and like trying to follow a lot of different people, but there was one resource that was talking about the potential of the more mushrooms that a fungi produces that is not happy, like it's not, the conditions aren't right for it, so it will produce more to spread more spores to get out of that area as a survival technique, so that way you can find soil. Do you know anything about that, or have you come across that at all?
Okay. Yeah, I guess I can relate to that in some ways. So back up north, we always used to look under dead elms for the morel mushrooms, and they had to be in a certain state of decay where the bark was just starting to peel off the tree, not before the bark was peeling off the tree, or after it was a big pile under the tree and there wasn't any bark left on the tree. So there is something to needing to reproduce, to find another host to be a symbiont with, so that you can then grow big enough and enough mass underground so that you can then produce enough fruiting bodies later on in your life when that tree then expires. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about on that. For those of you on Zoom still, the question was about some of these events like fire or other things that trigger mass fruitings of fungi above the ground as mushrooms. Is that a sign that something bad has happened, or is it just something that's happening as a benefit? And I think the answer is yes, or it depends, how that goes. So in that morel case, that there probably is something to them. They're trying to find a place to get more compatible circumstances and then go away, but maybe not completely. Like that, I said the word go away and the mic turned off. Yes.
So I'm not a big mushroom eater, but I'd like to start incorporating more of it into it. What would be some that you would recommend to experiment with eating wise for someone who's not a fan of them?
Oh, okay. So for someone who doesn't like store-bought mushrooms.
Do you have like a certain one, or
Okay. It's hard to know without knowing a person what to recommend about mushrooms, but there's a lot, believe it or not. Like if I go to an Asian grocery store, I can see like 8 different kinds of mushrooms you can't buy at Costco.
Yeah.
And that's kind of neat. And you can always go to Whole Foods or Aldi and pick up something on a seasonal basis too, that are unusual finds as well. And that's going to have to be a taste test kind of thing, which is, it can be tough because if they're prepackaged, then you got to commit to buying $8 worth of something you might not want. But on the other hand, if you know someone who does like mushrooms, then you'll be able to at least have the taste while they get the benefit of that $8. And so that's one way to go about it. And then to go on forays with knowledgeable people. It's always best to gain knowledge one thing at a time within the mushroom world and not try to overextend and get the dark purple insided scleroderma and end up with a bad night. So that's probably the best way to have a bad time with a mushroom too, is just to have a bad night rather than you know, a very bad 3 days before you're not here. So yeah, really honestly, yes. So I talk about enthusiasm with them, and I'm very cautious about giving anybody any advice about eat this one or that one of the wild mushrooms, because every one of us is different. And there are some people who are more sensitive to some things than others. So, yeah.
So what I've learned about a lot of mushrooms is that most of them, when eaten raw, are going to upset your stomach. And so for most people, some people are more sensitive and less sensitive. So like, what the common rule I have learned is ask somebody who knows.
Yeah.
And also, when in doubt, boil it really, really well before you eat it if you're worried about it.
Yeah, if you're pretty certain that someone identified it right for you and or you identified it right, cooking something well in the mushroom world is important, because they do contain chitin, unlike plants. And so chitin is your fingernails and the shrimp shells and all that stuff, and so it's not very digestible, and different types of proteins in the chitins can be irritating to different people. And so like if you've had like king oyster mushrooms from an Asian store, they can be almost like crunchy tough, kind of in a way that's unpleasant, and that's kind of that chitin you're trying to chew through. And so you really have to make them thinner or cook them a long time to break that stuff down. And some of them you can't break it down at all, and they're just never going to be good. So, and back there, she's been waiting. Yes. How is the edibility of mushrooms tested? That is a great question. I think they're better at testing for various specific toxins than they are for the actual edibility. Although I do know that on some of the mushroom ID sites, there's a couple of guys that are up in Northwest Florida that are very, very well versed in fungal ID. And a couple of them have gone into the questionable edibility boletes and done universal testing of how that works on their particular digestive system. And then like someone will say, well, that one's not known to be edible. And they'll say, oh, I just had a bowl full of those last week, blah, 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 and yada, yada, yada. Now, that gives you a short-term acute edibility, but as with any kind of potential food source, you don't know without good toxicology whether or not something will cause long-term health effects from small amounts over a long period of time. So, and that was found out to be the case with these false morels that are out there, the gyrometras, that unless they're cooked right, they contain hydrazines, and those hydrazines will cause you to get cancer after a long period of time. So, and actually, you know, that's the case with a lot of mushrooms. So that's another reason that many mushrooms contain those, and it's best to cook your mushrooms, even your store-bought mushrooms. So.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. I didn't mention earlier that we do have our plant drawing here tonight, and we have some lovely plants from Greenhouse Gardens, as well as some kunti from Chuck, I believe, one of our longtime members. And we have tickets for sale. The drawing tickets are $1 each, or 6 tickets for $5. So if you want to get some tickets, Julie is slinging tickets, and we're going to do the drawing in about 7 minutes.
That was awesome.
I hope it was good. Yeah. I felt the dry eyes with all the similar pictures and stuff like that. I don't know how
I work in service like the Park Service. And I really appreciate it. Yeah, I was really happy that we had a good turnout. I didn't talk too long. People didn't get up and leave. So.
It's a good presentation.
I thought it went really well. And that was the first time we haven't had
I was the one. Good technology. Excellent.
You're in the world of prescribed burns.
I am, yes.
Yeah, yeah. Do any work with correspondence with Tall Timbers up in Tallahassee?
I've met some of the people that are up there and,
Okay.
and done some things in correspondence with them. Yes.
Okay. My
Yeah.
sister worked for them. That's all.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. She's been a communication.
What's your
director.
sister's name?
Rosalie Rodriguez.
Oh wow.
You know her?
I've heard that name. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, that's really wonderful.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
She's getting ready to retire here in a couple of years.
Yeah.
She's been a communication director for a long time.
Okay. Yeah, I actually got to burn with Ed Comerick Jr. Several times, and now Zachary Cusack is up there, and he and I have been, cohorts for a very, very long time. Okay. About 18, 19 years.
Cool.
Yeah. 19 years. That's really weird.